So, guys, we'll put yesterday's horribleness behind us. Got to get back on track. Got a decent-sized card today. NHL is a decent-sized card, but I'm actually skipping the entire NHL card. I don't like the card whatsoever, so I'm just not going to do anything with that. Move over to college basketball. This is the card of the letdown, I will say, because there are 5 pretty major letdown spots that I would say, and I can't keep myself off of any of them somehow. Starting in the 7 p.m. slate, we're going to go to Longwood plus 2.5. Let's get right into it, man. Let's just do this. Longwood, the team of large erections. We're going to be fading Gardner-Webb here. This is more of a fade of Gardner-Webb. The line is telling you that Longwood is actually the better team here. I will say that KenPom has all of these numbers kind of in line with where the numbers are on the betting line as well. So none of these are really far off at all. They're all kind of within 1 point, I think, at most in every single one of these situations. So Longwood, they're actually ranked higher than Gardner-Webb in KenPom's rankings. The line is telling you that Gardner-Webb is the slightly worse team, as they're not getting a full home court advantage here just with the 2.5 number. Longwood, the one thing that scares me a little bit about this one is that Gardner-Webb plays a faster pace than Longwood does. Gardner-Webb at 55th in tempo, according to KenPom. But I think the spot is awful for Gardner-Webb. They're coming off winning on the road at UNC Asheville. And yes, you might say that, well, how could you suffer a letdown spot? This is going to be the case with every one of these. How could you suffer a letdown spot when you're battling for conference tournament seeding? That is true, but couldn't you also just make the same argument about just regular season in general? Because every regular season game has to do with conference seeding, even though, yes, this is coming down the stretch run, but it's still, you're jumping in, the letdown spot still exists in that you're fading a team as far as thinking that they might not put in max effort in a particular game, similar to what the letdown spot would do. So that's what we're doing here with Gardner-Webb. I believe that I went against them the last time they beat UNC Asheville. At home, they had Presbyterian up next on the road. I believe they were laying points on the road at Presbyterian, and they had High Point, who's the top team in the conference, up next. So that was a sandwich spot. They did not play well off of the win over at UNC Asheville in that game, lost outright to Presbyterian, the Blue Hose, the Blue Panties. So I won that one. And I'm doing the same thing here. I'm going back to the well. Gardner-Webb just went into UNC Asheville, one of the top teams in the conference, beat them. And up next, even though this is their final home game, so that gives me a little bit of hesitation here. But up next, they have Winthrop, which is another big game. Winthrop, one of the other top teams in the conference. I believe Winthrop is right behind. This is in the Big South Conference. Winthrop is right behind Gardner-Webb by a game, or I guess a game and a half right now. So Gardner-Webb, that game, these games could still wind up mattering as far as conference positioning is concerned. This Longwood game, I think Gardner-Webb might trip up in this game because they're coming off such a huge win at UNC Asheville. UNC Asheville, I think, might have been undefeated at home in the conference this year, and I think their conference home record went way back. I think it goes back to some point last year they had not lost a conference home game. So that's a pretty major win for Gardner-Webb, pretty major upset. I don't see what the line was in that one, but it was definitely an upset for Gardner-Webb there. Coming off that, I think they're going to be a letdown spot, and they already went into Longwood and beat them this year on the road by double digits, by 12. So you got the road reversal revenge angle coming in here a little bit too. Even though Longwood does have the better overall record, I don't know if people are just going to pay more attention to the Big South record of this one because they're 3 teams back of Gardner-Webb in the Big South, so it makes Longwood look like they're not the better team, even though the power ratings and the odds makers do have Longwood as a slightly better team. Longwood coming off a loss over Radford. That did break a win streak for them. They beat UNC Asheville the game before that, but it was at home. But losing to Radford, would that end their is that going to be something that ends their winning momentum because it broke their win streak? I don't really think so, because you could look at that as a sandwich spot. That was a bad spot against Radford, even though they had lost at home earlier in the season to Radford. They were coming off a game where they beat UNC Asheville at home, and they had this game up next, and they have High Point to finish the season. So these games matter more. I don't think they're going to overlook Gardner-Webb, but I think Radford caught them in a sandwich spot is what I'm saying. So you can kind of understand the Longwood loss there. I don't think Longwood's going to overlook Gardner-Webb looking towards High Point, which is going to be their final home game, because Gardner-Webb beat them by double digits in their own house. So I think they are going to show up focused for this one, whereas Longwood's focus might be questionable coming off the big win and playing a team that they already beat on the road by double digits. So that's play one. I can't help myself as far as playing these games. Longwood plus 2.5. Next up is going to be a home underdog in East Carolina plus 4. It looks like this line is actually at 3.5 in most spots now. This is going to be a fate of Memphis. This is the only time these teams are facing each other this year, I believe. So this one is not a second meeting, but I find this to be a letdown spot for Memphis. This is in the American Athletic. These teams have more games left in conference play than the Big South does. The Big South is one of the conferences that starts their conference tournament first, I believe. So their conference play ends a little bit earlier than a lot of these other conferences. The American Athletic one lasts longer than the others. Memphis played Florida Atlantic, FAU, for the first time this season and beat them. And they're actually coming off a bunch of big games in a row, even though they lost 2 of them at North Texas and got smashed by SMU on the road after that. Both those games, road losses. They came back home and they beat Charlotte, who's sitting in 3rd place in the conference right now. So pretty decent win there. And then beating FAU. That is a big win, dude. You're beating the team that's, even though they're in 2nd place in the conference, as I keep saying, Florida Atlantic is actually still the best team in this conference, better than South Florida, who the power ratings guys do not have South Florida. Very good. They have Florida Atlantic much better, even though Florida Atlantic does lapse defensively at times. That's a big win for Memphis. Now Memphis has to go out on the road after that. I don't think it's a good spot. I think it's a letdown spot. That win over FAU was huge. And after they go to East Carolina, who's one of the lower teams in the conference, they finish with UAB, who is above them in the conference, back at home in their home final. And then they have FAU again on the road to finish conference play. So this is a sandwich spot. This is the one down spot they have left in the schedule. I think Memphis could get caught. Memphis, I don't find them to be a very good coached team, very well-coached team. Sorry to Penny Hardaway, but I was seeing them struggle at times. Obviously, they struggled in the NCAAB tournament last year. They lost to Florida Atlantic. So that actually made that game even bigger. That win over Florida Atlantic, that was actually revenge as well, if you think about it. I didn't even think about that until right now. I'm thinking about it. Holy crap, that win was even bigger than you would think. It was a big win anyway, because they're beating FAU, one of the better teams in the conference, probably the best team in the conference, as I keep saying. But that was also revenge against the team that eliminated them from the NCAA tournament last year. Revenge against FAU the first time they played them this year. That's a huge win from Memphis. I probably should have played that game because of that revenge angle. I completely forgot about the revenge angle there. Totally forgot about it. And I think there was another even bigger angle there, I think, because I think Memphis has somebody who was on K-State last year. Is that true? They have, I'm pretty sure somebody on Memphis's team was on K-State last year. Naquan Tomlin. Yeah, I believe he was on K-State last year. So it was this weird double revenge scenario for Memphis in that game where Memphis had been eliminated from the tournament by FAU last year, but Naquan Tomlin, who was on Memphis, was on K-State last year, and they also got eliminated from the tournament by FAU. I can't believe I missed that double revenge angle. I should have been on Memphis in that game. That's crazy that that's the case. So FAU, as far as having Naquan Tomlin on their team, Memphis, as far as having Tomlin on their team, they got double eliminated basically by FAU last year, because Memphis as a team got eliminated by FAU, and Naquan Tomlin as a K-State player also got eliminated by FAU in the Elite 8 round of the tournament last year. Memphis, of course, got eliminated in the first round by FAU, and I won some cash on that game. So, because I felt that nobody was taking FAU going into that game. Everybody loved Memphis beating Houston without Sasser. Didn't think that was a big deal. Houston had nothing to gain by winning that game, really. So anyway, all that being said, that is a big, big win for Memphis. Not only beating probably the best team in the American Athletic, but exacting double revenge for FAU, double eliminating them, including Tomlin's team from the tournament last year. That's a huge win for Memphis. So I think this is a major, major letdown spot for all those reasons. Going to take East Carolina plus the 4 here. I think plus 3.5 probably still fine here. Nobody's going to want East Carolina. Everybody knows the Memphis name. They have the better record, the much better overall looking record. But Power ratings wise, Memphis isn't that much better, even though they're better enough to be laying 4 on the road, I guess. But East Carolina is also in a spot where they got to be in a bounce back spot. They'd won 3 games in a row pretty quietly against some of the lesser teams in the conference, but then they ran into Rice, who's also not a very good team, but had to go back out on the road for that one after back-to-back home wins, going out on the road, and Rice really destroyed them. They lost by 18 to Rice, and Rice not a very good team, so that's kind of embarrassing. East Carolina ahead of Rice in the standings. I think they're going to want to bounce back from that, and maybe they were even a little bit high on themselves after winning a few games in a row and having this Memphis game up next. They had all bigger opponents up next: Memphis, North Texas, SMU, and Charlotte, so I think they overlooked Rice. And I don't know if did they play Rice earlier in the season? It looks like they did not. So that was the only meeting they had against Rice. Having to go on the road, maybe a little bit of a spot where they got caught there against Rice. I think they're going to show up for this one against Memphis. The Memphis motivation is going to be questionable after such a monumental win over FAU for all the reasons I just outlined. I like East Carolina in this one. And East Carolina is also a team where they slow the pace down. So Ken Baum has them 171st, but he does have Memphis way down at 81st. So Memphis really just the overvalued team, like pretty much all season, just carrying that name recognition, and their record looks really good, even though they're not as good as their record looks. Ken Baum has them at 40th in luck, so one of the luckier teams in the country. Their adjusted defense, not very good. Memphis, one of the fastest teams in the country at 24th in adjusted tempo. It's another reason why I like this game. East Carolina getting points at home. This is going to be a huge pacing collision with East Carolina at 326th in tempo. So one of the slowest teams in the nation. And defensively, they're actually not that much worse than Memphis in adjusted defense. Memphis is just a way better scoring team, but I don't know if Memphis is going to bring their A game into this one. And if East Carolina can really ugly up this game and slow this pace down, I think that's going to frustrate Memphis. In addition to it being a letdown spot, you're getting points at home on East Carolina, getting points at home with the slower pace team. You know, I like that as well. I like East Carolina in that one for sure. I don't know if did I mention the pacing in the Gardner-Webb game? Because I'm a little bit concerned that Gardner-Webb is the faster paced team against Longwood, but even so, Longwood, not a terribly slow-paced team either, but I just think it's a bad spot for Gardner-Webb in that one. And, well, I already went through it, so we'll move on. So East Carolina +4. Moving on, Southern Utah -3.5 is going to be the next one. Southern Utah, or actually, you can get -3 right now in Southern Utah. Let's see if we can do that here. Yeah, it looks like you can play -3 on Southern Utah here. This is a spot where Southern Utah has the way worse record. And I think people are going to look at this and think, well, wait a minute. Like, how are we getting, they're playing against Abilene Christian. How are we getting Abilene Christian, the team that has the better record? Maybe people recognize the name Abilene Christian more than Southern Utah as well, because they've kind of been the better of those teams for a while now. And Abilene Christian in the I think it was in the weird COVID tournament in 2021, they pulled off a 14-3 upset over Texas in that Texas battle, because Abilene Christian, a little brother in Texas. So that was kind of a crazy upset in that tournament. So people might remember that too. But people are going to look at their records and think, well, Abilene Christian has the better record. They're 3 games ahead of Southern Utah in conference, and they're 3 games ahead of them with the overall record. So how are we getting points with Abilene Christian? But the odds makers are telling you that these teams are about even, giving Southern Utah basically home court. And Ken Baum actually has Southern Utah as the better team slightly. So I think they're actually maybe even being shortchanged in this line a little bit, only laying 3. And he's got Southern Utah at 59th in adjusted tempo. So they are a fast team, one of the faster teams in the country. Abilene Christian, not quite as fast at 112th. So you might see Southern Utah maybe speed up this game a bit and throw Abilene Christian a little bit out of their element there. Southern Utah is the worst defensive team, though, which I don't love, because I do tend to like taking the better defense, getting points. But in this spot, I don't love it. And Abilene Christian's not that great defensively, but they also really lapse offensively at times. Southern Utah is actually the significantly better scoring team in this matchup, even though they're the worst of the two defenses by a bit. Abilene Christian also in a total letdown spot. The one other thing that I guess gives you a little bit of pause here, though, is that Abilene Christian did also lose on their own floor to Southern Utah. But if you look at what happened in that game, Southern Utah was able to control the pace in that game, and they overcame an early deficit and really just took off in the second half. Although that game was a little bit of an outlier, so that scares me because Abilene Christian dominated them on the boards. Southern Utah shot ridiculously from the floor, almost 59% from the floor and 45.5% from three. Although they are the better offensive of these two teams, Abilene Christian only shot 25% from three. So the less predictable stat there, the 3-point range, that was 3-point shooting. That was a bit of an outlier for Southern Utah, a real big discrepancy there. So that gives you a little bit of pause because Abilene Christian was the better team on the boards in that game. But this spot for Abilene Christian is real bad. They're coming off 3 big games in a row where they went into Stephen F. Austin and took them out as a 9.5-point underdog. Big upset there, upset win, even though Stephen F. Austin completely outshot them to that and totally crushed them on the boards too. I don't know how, well, I know how Abilene Christian won that game was entirely because Stephen F. Austin committed 21 turnovers in the game. So even though Stephen F. Austin actually completely destroyed them statistically, the turnovers were a major factor in that game. So that's how Abilene Christian pulled off that upset. Then they came back home and they faced Cal Baptist, who's another one of the better teams in the conference. And Abilene Christian shot a pretty big outlier percentage from three. I would say they got out-rebounded in that game too. So even though they did dominate Southern Utah on the boards the first time they played each other, they're not a totally dominant rebounding team. They're not really that great a team in general, really, but they beat Cal Baptist pretty easily, but a lot of it was just because they were shooting way better than Cal Baptist. 45.5% from three is just kind of crazy. Over 31.6 from Cal Baptist, so a big outlier there. And that was pretty much the tail of that game. So that game maybe looks that's a little bit misleading as well. Wasn't quite, well, it only finished being a 6-point game in the end. And Abilene Christian, I thought they might be looking ahead to Grand Canyon coming out of that game, because this is why I'm going to go against Abilene Christian, because they then hosted Grand Canyon, who's the best team in the conference. Grand Canyon had already beaten them in Grand Canyon earlier in the season by 10. Cal Baptist had already beaten them once as well at Cal Baptist. So they were able to get revenge on both those teams. And beating Grand Canyon is just insane, man. And I think Grand Canyon was probably not in the best spot there, because Grand Canyon had lost a huge loss streak. They had only had 1 loss in the conference on the season and only 2 losses on the entire season until they ran into Tarleton State, who I keep saying is overrated. And Ken Baum has them, I think, probably still the number 1 luckiest team in the country. Grand Canyon ran into Tarleton and lost to them at Tarleton, and that broke such a long win streak for Grand Canyon that I think they lost the game twice, for lack of a better term. That can happen a lot when you have a good team that has like a huge win streak and they're not used to losing, and they lose a game and it breaks a long win streak and they're just not used to it. A lot of times that when it's a big game against a sort of like bigger opponent as well, it can really hang you over. Though Grand Canyon is much better than Tarleton State, but they're close to each other in the conference records and stuff. So that was a pretty big game as well. That broke their loss streak, even if it's against a little bit of a lesser opponent. Breaking a long win streak, like that, can hang you over into the next game. I think that's what happened there. And it was a second straight road game. And they'd already beat Abilene Christian once, and they got caught in the game against Abilene Christian. It was a pretty close game. Grand Canyon was losing for a lot of it, came back, took the lead in the second half, and then Abilene Christian did not go away. If you look at that game, Grand Canyon, they really outshot Abilene Christian from the field, shooting 49% to Abilene Christian's 38%. But Abilene Christian did dominate them on the boards in that game. So they had a good rebounding game in that one, winning the rebound battle by 11. But GCU, Grand Canyon, also only shot 26.7% from three. So that's kind of an outlier where they really shot pretty poorly from three. They took more threes than Abilene did. But Abilene did have more possessions than they did. They had 9 more field goal attempts, and they dominated the rebounding game. So Abilene Christian did outplay them, but now I think they're going to be in a letdown spot. That's a huge win, beating Grand Canyon. Now they're having to go out on the road to a Southern Utah team that plays at a faster pace than they do, that can kind of throw them off the game. And Southern Utah was able to control the pace in the game at Abilene Christian, which I was going to mention. That was one thing that happened there. So even though Southern Utah did beat them at Abilene Christian, so you might say, well, Southern Utah might overlook them because of that. I don't think so, because is Southern Utah really going to overlook anybody? When Southern Utah has lost 4 straight games, they just lost to UT Arlington in their most recent game, which fairly close game on the road. Can't really blame them for that loss. Arlington's a better team than they are, but you also might look back at Southern Utah losing by like almost 30 at Grand Canyon when they played Grand Canyon the most recent time. So that's not going to look that great either. So I don't think the public is not going to want Southern Utah here. The team with the worst record by 3 games, laying points, who got killed by Grand Canyon, whereas Abilene Christian just beat Grand Canyon, even though Southern Utah did go into Abilene Christian and beat them. So public might look at that and think, well, it's also going to be revenge now for Abilene Christian, which this might be one of those spots where revenge might be a little bit overrated there, because Southern Utah being at the bottom of the conference, having lost 4 games in a row, they're going to want to show something. This is their penultimate home game. They do have one final home game against Tarleton up next. And yes, Tarleton is ahead of both of these teams by quite a bit in the standings. That is true, but I don't think Southern Utah is going to overlook Abilene Christian in a spot like this. And I think Abilene Christian, they're just in the way worse spot, in the letdown spot. And I think the line just looks suspicious, where you have Southern Utah being the favorite as the team with the worst record. But Southern Utah, as I said, actually the better team in KenPom's rankings by several ranking spots. Pretty close, but better by several. And as I was just alluding to, or just about to start talking about, Abilene Christian lost to them, giving up 82 points on their own floor against Southern Utah. And usually the home team is the team that's able to control the pace. And if Abilene Christian couldn't really check Southern Utah's offense in that game and slow the pace down enough in that game, are they really going to be able to do it having to go into Southern Utah, going into like an elevation game there? I'm not so sure about that. I think this is a tough spot for them. So I think it's a letdown spot. I don't like it for Abilene Christian. So Southern Utah -3. Also going back to the well with a team in the Big Sky that I am 2-0 with. We're moving from the WAC to the Big Sky, so 2 mountain time zone games here. We're going back to the well here, and we're going to Northern Arizona, who I'm 2-0 playing Northern Arizona. They've won outright, I believe. Both times I've played them as decent-sized underdogs. I had them when they beat Eastern Washington in a huge win, and I had them when they beat Portland State, I believe, at home. Was that right? I believe so. And those were nice, easy wins as a dog for Northern Arizona. Those are both home games, though. So now I'm actually playing them as a road underdog this time. But this line, I think, is a little bit out of control, even though they're playing Idaho State. Idaho State, yes, they're the better team, which, of course, the line is telling you that. But this is also a game where Idaho State, they play a ridiculously slow tempo at 3:40. So they're in the bottom like 20 in tempo. Northern Arizona plays a bit faster at 125th, so significantly faster. But when you have the slower pace home team, and yeah, the home team is probably going to be able to control the pace a little bit. But when you have the home team, they're going to be able to control the pace, and it's the much, much slower pace team. That's not a good situation for laying a huge number. So even though Idaho State might be able to control the pace here, I don't like the fact that they're laying 8 points here. So this is going to be Northern Arizona +8. You don't want to be laying a ton of points with a team that's going to slow the pace down, because if it's going to be a slower pace, every point is going to mean more. And I think this is a bad spot for Idaho State. I think this is a sandwich spot. They just went into they beat Weber State at home. Weber State, one of the best teams in this conference, even though they're in 4th in the records right now in the standings. They were actually probably in 2nd before that game, because they're one game behind Montana and Northern Colorado after that loss. But everybody knows Weber State is one of the better teams in this conference. They're like always near the top of this conference. Idaho State with a big win there, and was it also revenge? Let me see. No, actually, they season swept Weber State, so they'd won at Weber State. So maybe it's just a good matchup for Idaho State. I don't know. We can look at what was the spot for? I think Weber State was actually were they in a bad spot there? Yeah, Weber State was in a bad spot, actually. That was a 3rd straight road game for them, and they had just gone into Eastern Washington and upset Eastern Washington at Eastern Washington, who's the top team in the conference right now. So Weber State was coming off a huge game, and they had Northern Colorado coming up next, which I believe is going to be today. So that was a sandwich spot for Weber State, so they got caught. So you can take that away from Idaho State. They were able to beat Weber State, but it was a really bad spot for Weber State. So Idaho State won that game. Now, I think Idaho State, you look at what they've done. They were coming off of a pretty ugly loss to Idaho in the game before that. So Although that was a revenge, or excuse me, not revenge. It was revenge for Idaho, but that's a rival. I keep saying revenge. It's a rivalry between the two Idaho teams. They played two pretty close, slow-paced games this year, but then, of course, Idaho State wasn't really going to overlook Weber State. The opposite happened. Weber State overlooked them and got caught. So Idaho State's coming off that. I think they're in the letdown spot now. Now they have Northern Arizona, who they already beat on the road. They already went into Northern Arizona. Northern Arizona has been pretty decent at home this year. They went into Northern Arizona, and Northern Arizona was able to speed up that game more than Idaho State would like it to be, and Idaho State still wound up winning the game, even though the game went up into the 80s, 81-79. So they were able to beat Northern Arizona, even though it was a game at Northern Arizona's pace. So this is going to be road revenge for Northern Arizona, and it might cause Idaho State to overlook Northern Arizona, because that's kind of what happens when you went into this team's house and you already beat them in their own house. You have a tendency to overlook them. So they might overlook Northern Arizona for multiple reasons here, because they're coming off a huge win over Weber. They're playing a team they already beat on the road in their place, Northern Arizona. And up next, they have Northern Colorado, which is going to be the final home game of the regular season for Idaho State. Northern Colorado in third in the conference right now. That's a much bigger game, and it's the senior day or whatever, senior night for Idaho State. So that's a much bigger game. And they go out to Montana, who's in second in the conference, to finish the season after that. So this, if there's any game they're going to overlook in the remaining schedule, it's going to be this one. Sandwiched in there between three bigger games against the top three teams in the conference, coming off a big win. Not only was it a win, but they beat Weber by 18 points. So they got to be feeling a bit high on themselves, playing a team they already beat on the road. Not a good spot at all for Idaho State. Meanwhile, Northern Arizona, I think they're in a bounce back spot. They're coming off an ugly double-digit loss at home to Idaho. But if you look at the spot they were in, they were coming off a win over Eastern Washington, which is a game I was on. They caught Eastern Washington in a bad spot and beat them at home. So they beat the top team in the conference at home. Big win over Eastern Washington. So Northern Arizona then stayed at home, and they were probably feeling kind of high on themselves, and they had a letdown against Idaho. And Idaho was a team they had already beaten on the road. So that was a game where I think they overlooked Idaho. I don't think they're going to overlook Idaho State now, even though they have Weber State and then Northern Colorado up next to finish the season. Two bigger games. They're coming off an ugly loss, whereas Idaho State, as I already pointed out, has this surrounded by much bigger games, and they're coming off probably their biggest win of the season. So this is a game where Northern Arizona's most likely going to be the more focused team, and this is an Idaho State team that already beat them on their own floor. I think Northern Arizona is going to try to muck this game up a bit, Northern Arizona plays the faster pace, but I think if the game gets into like an ugly pace where Idaho State might be kind of playing like a lower scoring game like they tend to do, I think the game's just going to get mucked up. And I think that helps Northern Arizona actually in a way, because they're just getting so many points at home. So I like that one. And then to finish the college basketball slate, we're going to go to Cal State Bakersfield. This is also going to be a letdown spot, +6 at home in this one. I think this line's dropped down from 7, though, whereas the other one, the Northern Arizona one, that line has actually gone up, I think, from 7 to 7.5, through the 7.5 to 8. So that line's gone up a little bit on Idaho State. I don't know why, because I think it's a bad spot for Idaho State. This one's going to be a bad spot for UC San Diego. They're coming off their big win of conference play. They just beat UC Irvine, who's the top team in the conference, and that pulled them into a almost tie with them. They're tied in conference record, but UC San Diego's behind them because they're behind them. I believe the overall record is coming into play there, and they're behind them by one game in that respect. But San Diego's pulled off 4 wins in a row, but most of those wins were kind of against like lower competition until they just beat UC Irvine. That was a huge game on their own on UC San Diego's floors. It was a home game. Big game for UC San Diego. They had a big lead, and they're actually losing the game early, almost by double digits. Came back, took a big lead in the second half, and they had a double-digit lead in the second half. They blew that entire lead, and then the game wound up going into overtime, and they were still able to overcome UC Irvine. And it was also revenge because they had lost to Irvine earlier in the season. So that was one of San Diego's 2 losses on the season. And of course, against the best team in the conference. That was kind of the battle between the top 2 teams in the conference. That's a huge game for UC San Diego. Now they're coming off that, having to go on the road into Bakersfield, which I don't even know what goes on in Bakersfield. Clown rodeos, like in the show Baskets. I don't know. I think it's kind of a desolate, like oil rig, type of city there out there in the California desert. Not a fun place to have to go to. And you just came off the win over Irvine. You're going to Bakersfield. They already beat Bakersfield at home earlier this season by double digits, so they just might overlook Bakersfield. They have Northridge up next, who's in 5th in the conference right now, I think. So Northridge is a bigger game coming up next, even though they beat Northridge by 21 already. That's still a bigger game than Bakersfield. I think this is a little bit of a sandwich spot, but it's really primarily a letdown spot. A huge win over Irvine, which I think is the big win of the season for UC San Diego. I don't think they have any bigger win than that. They didn't have a bigger win in the out-of-conference play, so huge win. You beat the best team in the Big West. And with Northridge up next, which is a little bit of a bigger game, this is a letdown spot for UC San Diego. And it's going to be revenge for Bakersfield, but it could mean UC San Diego overlooking that team. Like I said, the revenge doesn't matter as much. Revenge isn't as much of a motivator in like the in-season revenge, because in-season revenge happens all the time in these second meetings. But the real motivational aspect of it is that the team that won that first game tends to like ease up a little bit, thinking that it might be an easier win. They get a little bit complacent, and I think that's going to be the case here with San Diego. This line's actually looking like it's gone down to 5.5 now. From, I think, an opener at 7. I was able to grab it at 6. I think you still might be able to get it at 6. I think it's still good at 6. Taking the points with Bakersfield at home, I like it. San Diego, I think they're going to be a little bit complacent because they're coming off such a monster win over Irvine, but also they already beat Bakersfield by double digits. Bakersfield's coming off a pretty big win over UC Davis, so they're in 3rd in the conference right now. So it's a big win for Bakersfield, but I'm not going to consider this to be a letdown spot because this is their biggest game left, man. This is their final home game, so it's senior night. It's against UC San Diego, who's in 2nd in the conference. I don't think Cal State, who already beat them too once, I don't think Cal State Bakersfield's going to overlook San Diego here for any reason. It's their final home game, playing one of the best teams in the conference who already beat them once. That's it. And then they have to go on the road to Cal Poly and then out to Hawaii. That doesn't sound like a lot of fun. So I think Cal State Bakersfield is going to show up for this one. And that UC Davis one, if anything, it kind of broke some losing momentum they had. They had lost to Northridge, Irvine, and Long Beach, and those are all some of the better teams in the conference, really. So 3 straight losses against decent teams in the conference. The win over UC Davis will, I think, at least break that losing momentum a bit. So I think it might actually help carry some positive momentum into this game against UC San Diego. And people might look at this and think, well, wait a minute. Cal State Bakersfield, they just lost at UC Irvine, and UC San Diego just beat UC Irvine. And Bakersfield's got such an ugly-looking record compared to San Diego's. If the public's going to get involved in this game, I don't think they're going to be taking Cal State Bakersfield here for any reason, but I like it. And then a little bit of the cherry on top. I believe Cal State Bakersfield is, let me see, I believe they're the much slower paced team as well. They're at 327th in adjusted tempo, according to KenPom's rankings. So they're a very, very slow team. Playing San Diego, who is a much faster team, they're both slow teams. I thought San Diego was a faster team, but they're not. San Diego is the better team overall. I mean, for sure, they're laying points on the road. They're better offensively and they're better defensively. But this also is, but the spot, the reason for playing this is the spot. And then also both of these teams are actually in the bottom like 60 or so in tempo. So bottom 61 in tempo. UC San Diego 301st in tempo. So a game where both teams play a slow tempo, that's also going to lend itself to fewer points being scored and the points mattering more, the points being of more value. So that's also good for taking a home underdog. So we're doing that. That's a lot of college basketball, man, trying to bounce back here. I can't help myself. I can't keep myself off of these games here. And then going to the NBA. Yes, I do have a couple plays in the NBA. I thought I was going to have nothing until I saw the final 2 games that are on the slate here. We're going to go against 2 teams that played yesterday and play on 2 teams that didn't play yesterday. Play number 1 is going to be on the Miami Heat +5. I think this line's down a little bit from there. It looks like it's gone down from 5 to 4.5. It does look like the Heat have 66% of the tickets and 54% of the cash right now. I'm not sure I buy that whatsoever because the Heat, I don't think they're going to wind up being the public team in this game. I mean, how could they be? They're playing at the Denver Nuggets. I think people are only going to want the Denver Nuggets here, even though there is the revenge aspect of it, which I think actually matters a lot in this one. But Denver just played last night, and look at what they're coming off of. They went into Golden State and beat them by 16. Now they came back home and they crushed the Kings, who they had just gotten beaten by the Kings twice in a row, losing by 29 at Sacramento, and then losing at home by 4 to them. So Denver, that was a big turnaround spot for them. I think they actually were motivated last night and had revenge, and they smacked the Kings and beat them by 21 points. And now they have no time off. They just beat the Kings, and up next they have the Lakers and the Suns. So they have 2 big Western Conference games coming up next. I think those are going to be bigger games actually than this game against an Eastern Conference foe, the Heat. And I think this is a much bigger game for the Heat. So Denver's coming off a monster win last night, which was kind of quick double revenge for them. They played real well. They're coming off 2 big wins. This Eastern game against an Eastern Conference foe is sandwiched in between all these big Western Conference foes. Even though Miami does have a good record, I think the spot's a lot worse for Denver here. Miami, they're in the middle of a road trip, yes, so they're playing however many road games this is in a row. The All-Star break was in the middle of this, though. So they are now playing a 4th straight road game, though. So it's not the best spot for them. And it is a 3rd game in 4 days. But Denver's on a back-to-back, so that's not good either. So the rest spot is a little bit comparable. I would say Miami playing a 3rd game in 4 days. But is Miami really going to overlook Denver here? I'm not so sure about that. Miami did just go into Sacramento and beat them too, but people might just kind of consider that to be a wash at this point because both teams beat Sacramento by double digits in the recent games against Sacramento. And then Miami's coming off a game where I was on Portland and Miami played horribly in that game. That was Jimmy Butler's return and somehow still wound up covering the game in the end. I hate that. Portland had a huge lead for a lot of that game. Obviously should have covered the game and wound up not even covering. Absolutely ridiculous, but Miami didn't totally show up for that game, in my opinion. I think they're going to show up for this one. This is a big game against Denver. Denver's the team that beat them in the NBA Finals last year, and this is the first time they face each other this year. So this is a big spot. This is one of the spots where revenge actually is going to matter. For Miami here, having been the team that lost to Denver in the finals last year. And I think people are going to also consider that when the public is betting this game. They're going to say, well, Denver easily swept them. I think they swept them right in the finals last year. Denver's the better team, man, which, yeah, that's true. And the line's telling you they're the better team, but I just don't think this is a good spot for them. Both teams have been pretty hot coming into this game, but Denver's in the worst of the 2 spots, I think, based on who the opponents are surrounding this game. Miami's off a game against Portland where I don't think they put in a total max effort there. And the game before that, you could say that Miami's maybe a little bit better rested because they had Jimmy Butler and Jovic suspended in the prior game against Sacramento, so they didn't play. And then in this game, and also Rozier didn't play in that game either, so he just came back in the previous game. So those 3 guys didn't even play in the previous game. So they played in the one game against Portland, but didn't play in the game before that. I think Rozier was out for a couple of games. So I don't know if Hero is going to finally be back tonight. He might come back tonight, but I don't think the reverse injured player theory is really going to come into play here. But that does mean that the line might drop a little bit more on the Heat here. So I think you would have to get on this now if you think Hero might come back before this line drops further. And I do kind of think the professional money might start coming into the Heat as well. So I don't think this line could only move kind of towards Miami here. But if Hero comes back, I mean, I don't think Miami's going to get complacent because of that. I mean, it's such a huge revenge spot against such a huge opponent in Denver. Miami, I think, is going to show up here. So I like Miami, whereas Denver, I think, is in more of a situation where I think they could overlook the opponent a little bit. And then the final game I'm going to be on is going to be to take the Washington Wizards, one of the ugliest teams in basketball, one of the only teams left who does not have double-digit wins at this point. Look at the spot that the Lakers are in, man. They just played 2 games on the road. They lost to the Suns in a pretty big game, which I think was a TV game. Big game against the Suns. They played pretty well, but they lost by 10. Pretty tough game against the Suns on the road. Can't really blame them for a loss like that. Then they went into LA. They're both LA, but they played a road game against the Clippers, even though I think both of these teams play at the Staples Center, right? I forget, but it was considered to be a home game for the LA Clippers last night, and a huge win for LA. I mean, that's the cross-city rival. Huge win for LA. Both teams are a huge win for LA over LA, man. Look at what the Lakers did last night, though. I had my eye on the score in that game, and the Clippers were absolutely annihilating them. The game looked like it was over. The Clippers had a giant lead. Clippers being the better team as well, although the Clippers are only favored by 1.5 because both teams are kind of considered to be even though the Clippers are considered to be a home team in that game, it's LA, so it's possible the Lakers had a lot of had a pretty big crowd there. But the Lakers are getting blown out of the building. They had like a 20-point comeback. They were down 15 or something with not much. They were down 15 with like 9 minutes left in the game or 10 minutes left in the game. They were down 20 at points, more than 20 in the second half, and they came all the way back and won the game. I don't think they're going to have anything left in the tank, man. How could the Lakers have anything left after a monumental win and just a massive comeback against one of the best teams in basketball at this point and their cross-city rival in the Clippers? That is a monster win. And up next, they're going to have the Denver Nuggets, and then the Thunder, and then the Kings, then the Bucks, then the T-Wolves, then the Kings, then the Warriors. So all their upcoming games are way, way bigger than this game. I think they're going to be not really having much left in the tank and maybe feel high on themselves after just such a monster win over the Clippers for all those reasons that I just said. And they got the lowly Washington Wizards coming into their house. Lakers have no time off after that absolutely epic comeback. The Wizards, nobody's going to want anything to do with them, man. Why would you? They have 12 straight losses. Nobody's going to want anything to do with the Wizards here. But I think the good thing for the Wizards is they're trying to break a loss streak by now going back out on the road after losing 2 games at home. So, and they have 1 day off. But I think if anything, this is going to break their losing momentum. I think they have reason to kind of show up in this game here. They've had some games where they play competitively, so they're not just like rolling over. Like these teams are not tanking, I wouldn't say. The Wizards are just bad, but this is such a bad spot for LA. And I think this is a spot where Washington getting to go out on the road, leave all that negative energy behind them at home, get 1 day off to try to break that momentum. You don't need them to win the game either. You're seeing them to cover a big number here. I think this line might have been at 10 in some spots, and it's gone down to 9.5. Wizards 91% of the cash and 86% of tickets. I don't think I buy that, even though I might buy that they wind up with the cash discrepancy. I don't buy that the Wizards are going to wind up being the public team here. I mean, who in their right mind is going to want the Wizards? I am not in my right mind, so I'm taking the Wizards for all those reasons. That's going to do it for me, man. So recap, huge college basketball card here for betting wise, even though it's not as big a card as some of these other days, but there are just a lot of spots that I just can't keep away from in college basketball. Longwood plus 2.5, ECU, East Carolina plus 4, Southern Utah minus 3, Northern Arizona plus 8, and Cal State Bakersfield plus 6. And then in the NBA, Miami Heat plus 5, Washington Wizards plus 9.5. Let's turn this around, man, after 2 bad days. But last night was actually really bad. Like, I deserve to probably lose all 3 of those. Those are just unbelievable. I don't know how Butler played such a horrific game. That was the worst one, just such a bad way to end the night. But the previous night was just bullshit, obviously. I could easily have been 4-2 or maybe even 5-1 that night. So let's get back on track here. Last night we can just forget about it. We were hot, and then the night before that should have been a winning night. So let's do it. Let's get back on track. I like to think I know what I'm doing here, so come on, man. Let's do it. Peace.